And now I'd like to introduce you to this gentleman who we had our one-to-one back in August, but couldn't fit in Eric until now. So, Eric Zuniga.
In a sense, we all have a reference point to traumatic memories, and trauma could be looked at as micro and macro. So it varies from person to person because everyone in life, they just experience things differently. And so for some, experiencing judgment or criticism, it's no big deal. So that would be like a micro trauma. But an automobile accident or loss of a relationship, a significant relationship, could be very traumatic, more like a macro trauma. But again, it's to the degree of how a person perceives it. A recent example, I was speaking to a client whose electricity was cut off. And when the electricity went off, the client fell into a depression. And it was interesting because at the same time, another client's electricity went out due to a storm. And I'm sure some of you may have heard that there were storms on the eastern seaboard of Florida. And a lot of electricity went out. A lot of folks lost their homes. But this person had said that they thought of it as camping out and taking a break, like a vacation. So I just wanted to share that sort of different framing because perception, or the way we think about stuff, is central to what is traumatic or not in life. And I know that's what I'm talking about. These stories include descriptions of traumatic experiences. So if you need to silence the audio or step away at any time during the presentation, that's okay. These stories are to frame trauma in the context of transcending them and identifying mental health. So with that, I'm going to continue with the story of the person in crisis. And I remember we were sitting on this bench having a chat, and it was evident that her crisis had to do with the past, the traumatic past. So I knew this person had resiliency to realign with her well-being. And my job, as I saw it in my profession, is to guide another individual, another person towards mental wellness. And so that was the center of our discussion, to find a way for her to reclaim her mental stability through her own resilient nature. So it wasn't about my expertise. Again, I was a guide just to show a few markers on the roadmap of life. And if you think about it, it's like a guide that's in the rainforest. I could point out the leaves that are edible, or the plants that are poisonous, or a bird that's nesting, or those kinds of things. So it's just pointing it out, and each individual can think of it however they want. So this client in a crisis, basically, I was listening. And when I say listening, it's about deep listening. It's an ability that we all have in common. It is listening with compassion and from a calm, quiet mind. And as I listened, what I heard was that her memories were overwhelming her mind, and she just needed to express it, sort of like a sneeze or a cough that she got to get out. I just felt that she just needed to just share what she had been through in life. And I knew that once she got through this moment, this phase of overwhelm, that she was going to be all right. And I could sense her strength above the crisis. Another way to say it is, I was listening for her insights, her authentic self. So the discussion continued, and after a moment, as her mind began to restabilize, there was a pause. And in this pause, it just occurred to me to ask her, do you want to be in pain? Now, my question for the listening audience is one I'd like to ask, is similar. is there any point in your life that you wanted to be in pain? I'm going to rephrase it just a little bit. Have you ever wanted to experience mental anguish or emotional suffering? And I think the answer is pretty immediate, but you can keep it in your mind because this is an exercise just for yourself. And what I have found is it's near unanimous that no one wants pain and suffering. Instead, if we're in emotional turmoil, we want it to go away. Now, a dear friend had said to me, Eric, it doesn't make sense to ask people what they don't want. Ask what it is that folks do want. So I'm going to rephrase the question here again. So the question here for you to ponder is, what do you truly want in life? What is your heart's aspiration? And I'm not a genie, so I can't grant anyone 3 wishes. So the reason why I'm stating these questions is that they were similar to the questions that I had asked the person going through the crisis. And when the person in the crisis, when I asked, do you want to experience pain? The answer was flat out, no, Eric, I want to be happier. And then there was another pause, and I couldn't see it with my eyes, but I could feel it with my consciousness. And it was the most amazing thing. Her energy shifted. It was like a clearing, and the tension began revving down into silence. And after her pause, we then began chatting about what happiness meant to her. And she even gave examples of what it felt like to be joyful and contented. And her mind shift became evident, and the struggles of crisis and just vanished completely. And somehow in an instant, she reclaimed her well-being. She had rediscovered the resilience of her mental health that was in her already. Now, there's a lot more to the story, but the point that I want to make is that this person went from crisis to calm. She let go of a mindset of the past for something deep within her spirit. My practice as a mentor and journey as a survivor centers around the 3 principles, which are mind, consciousness, and thought, founded by Sydney Banks. And Sydney said many times that once a person identifies with their well-being, with their authenticity or their innate intelligence, it never goes away. It's yours for life. And a life guided by insight is a different level of living than being directed by the intellect or the ego. So where is the wisdom? I think that's becomes the ultimate question, is where is the wisdom within? And finding well-being or wisdom is like finding a 4-leaf clover. And I was at a conference, and I remember this topic came up, and people were like, do 4-leaf clovers really exist? And at first it seems impossible. But as they were traipsing around into this field, it was like one person found a clover, 4-leaf clover, and another person. And eventually it was clear that 4-leaf clovers exist. And this is similar to our resiliency. And I know this is just an analogy, but it's something that's inside all of us. And when we have a sense of it, it becomes easier and easier to identify. And everyone's born with it. It's an energy. It's how we learn to walk. It's how we learn to talk and smile and cry. It's so this inner energy gives us the ability to experience life. Otherwise, we'd be hooked up to a machine or have a battery pack or something on us, similar to a computer. So in this sense, we're all the same. We have this divine energy that is within me and you and everyone. And it is the power of our resilient nature. And when you realize it, a shift happens and mental health restores. And so I'm going to continue a little bit with, rather than asking, where is well-being? The question here is, how can a person nurture it? And think of it this way. Let's say you're living the life you've dreamed about and everything you wanted has come true. How would you feel about that? What would your feelings or emotions be like? In your mind, you could just for a moment see yourself living that ultimate life. And now that it's true, just name some of those feelings. And I don't know what they are, they're just for you, but the feelings could be happiness, love, joy, or relief. And as I mentioned earlier, I have been in the health and human services field for a few decades. And when I began as a clinician working with individuals and groups of people that had nowhere else to turn, I knew that there was something more than medications and behavioral management. And of the hundreds upon hundreds of people I've guided towards well-being, every person found it in their own way. And it's for this reason there are studies and there's evidence now that validates that well-being is innate, and it frequently resurfaces with a calm mind. And I also want to mention that, many folks, including myself in life, have done something which is called self-medication. And I think that for a lot of folks, it's not to party, but to find a calm mind. And for some that haven't found a healthier way to do it, they may continue and it may look like an addiction. But once a person finds another route, there's a shift. And there's been folks that have been using chemicals or doing certain things, and they just, once they find another way, it just drops completely. So I just want to say that there's a healthier way to find a quiet mind and contentment. And the best part is that mental health is already within everyone, and it's one insight away. But I'm not special and I don't have any superpowers. I'm an ordinary guy. And what I do have is an understanding of mind, thought, and consciousness as functions within the psyche, and how these essential functions produce experience. That's pretty much what a 3 principles mentor or practitioner does, is guide a person towards their resilient nature, their innate intelligence. So closer to my point, if I can restore my well-being and a person in crisis can restore her well-being, then it is possible for anyone. Once it becomes self-evident, it never goes away. And at this moment, I want to share something about myself and my experience of transcending trauma. But before I share my experience of transcending trauma, I want to pause because it's filled with trauma and abuse. And I want to give you an opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to adjust your volume or take a break if you need to during this part of the presentation, because it's not speaking about trauma to energize it or activate it. Instead, it's to frame trauma in the context of going beyond it and identifying the mental health within that can restore well-being naturally. The trauma that I had experienced, primarily in my childhood and my teenage years and it was so severe that it separated me from my well-being, my intimacy, and my childhood. It was as if those aspects of myself were severed. And I lived a significant part of my life without realizing that I even had traumas, because I wanted to forget. And I wanted to be part of the community, blend in with everybody. But it wasn't possible. There wasn't any more room under the psychological rug for me, and it would just come out. So eventually I had to face the music, and it wasn't a very pretty song. And running from the shadow of trauma is like when a child closes their eyes to make the world disappear. It's sort of like it works for a little bit, like, okay, you're all gone, you know, but that only works so long, and I had to find another way. So at the age of 4, I was human trafficked. I walked into a home and I had no idea what I was walking into. It was devastating. I was exposed to the adult world, or the shadow side of our world. And for that 1.5 years, I lived my life under the idea of threat, that if I did not perform, I would not live. And it took years to overcome this idea of what this world was about. And some of those children and teenagers did not make it out of that home. So I am grateful to be here and to share this with you. However, as I was coming into my teen years, I had been abused at the age of 16 by clergy. And I could remember saying to myself, I'm just getting over this childhood experience. And now I'm going into another, which, for lack of a better word, folks, another rape, another abuse. And as an adult, I experienced domestic violence, or intimate partner violence is what it's referred to now. So I'm sharing this with you again, not because I want myself or you to feel sad, but it's to let you know that I have such a solid reference to well-being within me that I can share this story and I continue living my life. Now, I've created a trauma-informed series that's free. It's a free resource to bring awareness to how trauma is experienced and how it can be transcended. And in a moment, I'm going to share this resource with you pretty soon. So, but I just want to say that for me, it took decades to understand what I had gone through and to bring closure. But what I have found is that everyone can restore and realign with their health. And for me, an aspect of my healing process was to reach out to a legal firm, Jeff Anderson and Associates, to represent me and bring awareness to the unheard voices of children that have been abused, because everyone deserves a voice and everyone deserves a second chance. The 3 Principles Global Community, which can be found at 3pgc.org. There's numerous mentors and practitioners like myself all over the globe, in the UK, in Brazil, in the United States, Canada, that are trauma-informed, and they can provide some sort of coaching or mentoring. Heartfelt Presence is another. It's 24/7, so no matter what time zone you're in, Heartfelt Presence is where you can actually Zoom with coaches live from around the globe. And there are some that speak various languages. And then there's 7 Cups, which is an online chat. So it's not a Zoom, it's more like texting, where you can talk with a listener. And it's actually in pretty much every language throughout the world. And it's very fascinating. I don't know how they do it, but no matter what language you speak, you type it in there, and the listener, if they don't speak your language, it'll convert into their language. And when they type, it converts back into the language of the person who's calling them. But there's also warm lines, and I'm going to stop sharing screen, but there's warm lines and some other internet. And if you want to reach an international warm line, one of the ways to do that is just type in warm line or crisis line, and stuff will come up. But I just want to say that, you know, every storm produces a rainbow, and every cloud has a silver lining. So I really just want to get back to the feeling that everyone on the planet is seeking, which is a good feeling. And it may come through work or relationships, but for me, it's a feeling of divine love. I just want to, again, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share here today with all of you.
And I am so glad you said yes to speaking. Seriously. And thank you for sharing so personally and powerfully. Yeah. Thank you.